Hello. This sermon audio is a ministry of the Town Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. If you would like to learn more about us, how to connect, or how to support us, go to our website, thetownchurch.org. While listening to the Bible preached is a healthy part of our spiritual formation, it is not the whole picture. So if you aren't a part of a local church, we encourage you to prayerfully commit to a local body of believers where you live. We're glad you can join us, and we hope God uses the following sermon to reveal more of His glory to you.
Friends, we're here to worship a good God together. If you're anything like me, sometimes when I walk in on Sunday mornings, it feels like I have to force it a bit. That maybe I'm not feeling what I think I should be feeling, or my head's in a little bit different space, and I feel a little bit like I've got to force it. Vince and I were talking this morning, and the church has been around for almost 11 years now. That means we've had over 500 Sunday morning gatherings like this. And if you've grown up in the church, you have probably thousands of Sunday morning gatherings like this. Don't let this just become another routine and just something that we do and move through the motions. We're here to worship a really good God. Sometimes when I walk in here, I feel like I'm going through the motions a little bit. I've done this before. I'm going to do it again. And it feels a little bit forced. And really, I think the only solution to this is that we understand more of who God is and God in all of His glory. This is what should compel and propel our worship, isn't it? And so we've decided to take these first 3 weeks of this new year to specifically look at God's glory and have that be what propels us into this year. Vince started this 2 weeks ago, and we saw the lordship of Jesus over everything. Last week, we saw God's goodness in Psalm 34. And this week, we're going to use Hebrews 12 to show us more of God's glory. So if you got your Bibles on you, let's open up to Hebrews chapter 12. Or get your phones out. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews is a bigger book in the New Testament toward the back of the Bible. Hebrews chapter 12 this morning. Now, before we jump in, I want to give some context of this book. So this isn't currently part of our sermon series. The author of Hebrews wrote this book to encourage endurance in his readers. And his readers was a mixed group. It both had Jewish Christians, so those who were born Jews but became Christians later in life, and those who were Jews but only appeared to be Christians. So his audience is both of these. But the problem is a temptation is starting to arise to leave this new faith by those who only appear to be Christians and go back to Judaism. Persecution is starting to arise. And so the author writes this book to encourage his readers to stay the course and not leave and go back to Judaism. What's his main rationale for this? Through the whole book? It's because Jesus has changed absolutely everything. And it's in Jesus that we most clearly see the magnitude and the weight of God's glory. And so in Jesus, we see God's glory that has the power to transform us, leading us to then live lives of worship. The latter half of the book of Hebrews is a lot about how do we then live. We live differently. And it's all because of the glory of God that we see in Jesus. And so it's exactly this that the author of Hebrews is now going to show us in our passage today. The glory of God, which is the reason for why we live a life of worship. But make sure we understand this, just like last week. The author is not looking to obtain some intellectual assent from us only. He's wanting us to feel this, to be overwhelmed by the God of glory, so our hearts explode with this, and so then we live lives of worship. And so to accomplish this, as you can imagine, the author's strategy is pretty dramatic. Our passage this morning contains a huge contrast. Two sides of this contrast, and both sides is going to show us a fundamental aspect of God's glory. So I want us to look for this. These two fundamental aspects of God's glory in this contrast. We're going to look at the first side first. Open up, if you haven't yet, Hebrews 12. I haven't, I should have. Hebrews 12, we're going to start in verse 18. I'm just going to read the first couple of verses of our passage first, verses 18 through 21. Remember, the context, we should be living a different sort of life, a life of worship. Now he's going to give the rationale, verse 18. For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire, and darkness, and gloom, and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given, if even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. So this first side of the contrast is negative. We have not come to see God's glory here, we've got to answer that question. What have we not come to? Now, these verses are a little strange. It doesn't just come out and say it. It's a reflection of a story that happens back in Exodus chapters 19 and 20. Let me give you all the clues again and see if you can put this together. What we've not come to is something that can be touched, and it's associated with a blazing fire, and a dark storm, and a trumpet, and a voice that was asked to cease. Specifically, the voice ordered a people to stay away from the mountain. And we also have Moses here, and he's trembling with fear. What have we not come to? You put all the clues together. What have we not come to? You can just say it. Can you put the clues together? It's physical. It's a mountain. There's Moses. There's a fire. Mount Sinai. Good. Everybody yelled Mount Sinai. Nice job. We've not come to Mount. Good job. We've not come to Mount Sinai. That's where all these strange phenomena took place back in Exodus. Remember, this is absolutely pivotal in the life of the Jewish people. This is highly symbolic. Mount Sinai is where Moses received the Ten Commandments, where God showed his people how to live differently, set apart from everybody else, where they were given the Old Covenant. Therefore, Mount Sinai represented the Old Covenant. So what about God's glory is impressed upon us at this pivotal moment in Israel's history? What picture of God do we get? Verses 18 through 21. There is an overwhelming sense of God's majesty and his power and his authority and his holiness, isn't there? This is God's transcendence. A blazing fire, an enveloping darkness, gloom, a wild tempest, the piercing note of a trumpet that was so loud that all the people of Israel could hear it. Within this fury of the wild and powerful forces of creation, the transcendent Creator himself makes himself known at Mount Sinai. So God's transcendence is the first aspect of God's glory I want us to see in this passage. God's transcendence, it's his bigness, his power, his sovereign control over the entire universe, his unimaginable enormity, all these things about God's otherness that are difficult for us to grasp. He's everywhere at all times. He's all-knowing. He's all-powerful with perfection, with no beginning or end. The glory of God rests upon his transcendence. He's not like us, is he? He's not like us. He's not our little buddy. If we think we can manipulate God to get out of what we want, then we're not understanding God's transcendence. He does not exist to fulfill our wishes. We have no claim upon him, and his existence and perfection does not depend upon us. We can't confuse him. We can't refuse him. We can't run from him because he's everywhere. We can't trick him because he knows all things. We can't control him because he's all-powerful. He's not merely an extension of our hopes and dreams. He's not simply the material universe. Rather, God is completely other. We can never fully understand him, fully comprehend him, fully capture him. He is bigger than any of our categories. His holiness is purer. His perfection is truer. His love is stronger. His goodness is sweeter. His mercy is deeper. His power is greater. His faithfulness is sturdier. His wrath is graver. His justice is straighter. His grace is wider than we have the capacity to behold. This is the God whose voice made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them. It is this God whose presence created a huge hunk of rock and transformed it from Mount Sinai into a special set of place part now that's so radically different from every other place that if even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. This is the same God who, slides behind. There's that one slide, we'll come back to it. This is the same God who Paul describes here. This is what Paul writes. The God who is the blessed and only sovereign, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who alone has immortality, who dwells in unapproachable light, whom no one has ever seen or can see. To him be honor and eternal dominion. This is the glory of the transcendent God of the universe. He's completely other. This is the transcendent God. And this is the first aspect of God's glory and the first side of this contrast that I want us to see in our passage this morning. It's epitomized at Mount Sinai and the Old Covenant. God's glory we see here, and this compels our worship. We worship a God who's not like us. And that had ramifications for the Israelites. For them, it meant specifically two things at least. There were two profound realities. One is of separation, and the other is of trembling. See, at Mount Sinai, nobody except for Moses and later Aaron could even touch the mountain. Not people, not animals. God's otherness, expressed in his perfect holiness, would not allow it. Even later, but still in the Old Covenant. Do you remember God set his special presence on the Ark of the Covenant? Special presence, and that was where he was going to meet with the people of Israel. But even then, only certain priests, at certain times of the year, in certain ways spelled under the law, were still even able to enter that special room. Under the Old Covenant, separation was the only way a sinful people, you and me, by the way, too, a sinful people could exist in relationship to a perfect, holy, and transcendent God. Did you notice what Moses felt as he looked at Mount Sinai? What did he say? He said, he's trembling with fear. That's a pretty natural response, don't you think? God's transcendence resulted in separation and trembling. This is the first aspect of God's glory in our text and its result. But the giant contrast isn't yet finished. There is a second side to it, and this contains the second aspect of God's glory and its result. So to further show God's glory, wait, can you imagine that? What we just walked through, there's more. So the author's like, to further show even more of God's glory, our author in verse 18 explicitly states that Mount Sinai is not what we, as followers of Jesus, have come to. So what have we then come to if it's not Mount Sinai? Let's read it. It's in the second half of this contrast. I'll read verses 22 through 23. But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. So if we've not come to Mount Sinai, what have we come to? You can just say this one out loud too. Yes, much better. Mount Zion. Not come to Mount Sinai, we've come to Mount Zion. So catch the contrast here, how Mount Zion contrasts with Mount Sinai. Just like verses 18 through 21, the author strings many truths together to build an overwhelming case for God's glory. Look at verse 22. Rather than an earthly Mount Sinai, followers of Jesus have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. To get the significance of this, we need to understand that Mount Zion, over time, came to symbolize the meeting place of God's people with God. So like Mount Sinai, Mount Zion's a meeting place with the transcendent God of the universe where God dwelt and met with ancient Israel. But what's different about Mount Zion? This is where we see the second aspect of God's glory. Rather than Mount Zion being marked with the same intense and wild reminders of God's transcendence that marked Mount Sinai, his otherness that resulted in separation and trembling, Mount Zion is marked by a huge party representing God's personal presence that resulted in communal joy. Look at this. The picture here is a crowded celebration in a meeting place of God. Angels relishing and celebrating God's glory as far as the eye can see. But what's more is that we sitting in this room, if you trust Jesus, we, the present day church, are joining them in this. The assembly of the firstborn, verse 23. We're all there together. But even that's not all. Not only are all present day believers a part of the celebration in God's presence, so also are the faithful who have since died. This is the likely meaning of for the spirits of the righteous made perfect in verse 23. So here we are. Followers of Jesus, having come to the heavenly meeting place of God, surrounded by angels and other present-day believers and those faithful who have already died in a spirit of sheer communal joy. But what is actually most remarkable about all of this is in verse 23. We have also come to God, the judge of all. Believe it or not, God is there as well. See, we not only enter the meeting place of God, but we actually enter into God's very presence. So catch what this means. This means that we, and not just certain priests in certain times of the year in certain ways, are invited in to be actually in God's very presence. God is now personally near us. No longer is there separation. The big transcendent God at Mount Sinai, who is completely other, is also the near God of Mount Zion, who is personal. The unapproachable transcendent God is here known as an approachable personal God. God is not only transcendent, which resulted in separation and trembling, but God is also at the same time personal, which now results in nearness and communal joy. This is the second aspect of God's glory in our text. God's personally present and results in nearness and communal joy. Consider this with me. I hardly have a category for this. Consider God's glory with me. This is utterly unique to the Christian God of the Bible. Think about this with me. The God who has no beginning and end, who created everything, who's absolutely perfect, is at the same time the God who is personally near us. The God who thought up black holes, the God who painted the monarch butterfly, is at the same time the God who intimately understands your longings and your desires and your pains and your fears, all of them. God's not distant. God's not fate. The glorious God who spoke creation into existence speaks to you. The glorious God who can see into the farthest reaches of the universe sees you. The God who hears absolutely everything hears you. The God who knows everything knows you. The God who loves all of humanity also loves you individually. Psalm 139 is a giant celebration of this aspect of God's glory. Here's how Psalm 139 starts. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You searched out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it. This is a reflection of God's glory. A God who is so big, and yet a God who is right here. So what this means is that so far in our passage, we are looking at two different angles upon the glory of our one God. A God who is majestic and perfect and powerful and completely other, that inspires trembling and separation at Mount Sinai, is at the same time a God who is personal and gentle and intimate and present, who inspires communal joy at Mount Zion. Can you fathom the glory of God? Like this should just put us on our faces. Can you fathom the glory of this God? The God at Mount Sinai is the God at Mount Zion. Why? How can that possibly be so? Has God somehow changed and become something different? Why is God at Mount Zion near rather than separated, inspiring joy rather than trembling? As we answer this question, please know this, that God's character has not changed at all. He's not somehow less holy now. He's not somehow less transcendent. He isn't somehow less other than us or less, listen to this, he isn't somehow less offended by our sin now. He's not less holy. So what changed? Why are the faithful, who by the way commit sin, Why are the faithful now able to experience God's glory as nearness and joy rather than separation and trembling? My friends, it is here that we arrive at the epitome of this passage. We are about to see the epitome of the glory of God. It's here we get the clearest, overwhelming picture of God's glory. The epitome of God's glory is the answer to all these whys. Why have we left Mount Sinai and come to Mount Zion? Why can we now be in the presence of a holy God? Why can the dead saints now stand in the presence of God? Why can we commune with God rather than remain separated? Why does God's presence mean for us joy rather than fear? The answer to all these questions is what one author wrote is now the rhetorical climax of this entire book of Hebrews. Let's read it. Verse 24. We have also come to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. What's the answer to all those whys? Who is the answer to all those whys? Here's a Sunday school question for you. We can all shout this out. Who is the answer to all the whys? Jesus. Exactly. Jesus himself is the completion of this giant contrast in our passage. He is the brightest, surest, most clearest way to gaze upon the glory of God. To bring this home, our author uses two extremely loaded words, sprinkled blood. See, unlike us, the Jewish mind already had a category for this. And it happened at Mount Sinai. When God gave them the law, he also told them that nobody could be in his presence without the sprinkling of blood to help cleanse their sin. It couldn't happen. Sprinkling of blood had to happen. God's presence required sprinkled blood. But the problem that his old covenant way of doing wasn't perfect. It had to be repeated over and over and over. And it never allowed an entire people to be in direct communion with a perfectly holy God. It was never the perfect fix. This is a huge problem for you and me because we sin, don't we? This is a problem for us. And it isn't that our sin is less than an offense before a perfectly holy and transcendent God today than it was in ancient Israel. God still requires, can you think about this? God still requires sprinkled blood for sin. So what are we supposed to do? We can't do anything, can we? We can't work our way out of this. But Jesus did everything. Jesus is God's grace to us. Listen to this. For us, Jesus lived the perfect life that we never could. For us, Jesus died the death that we deserved and paid the penalty that we owed for our sin. For us, Jesus rose again from the dead, breaking the power of sin forever. For us, Jesus established a new covenant through his own blood. If we trust him, Jesus' sprinkled blood covers our sin and gives us his righteousness. Can you fathom that? Nothing else in life works this way. And this is why Jesus' blood speaks a better word than Abel's. Back in Genesis chapter 4, Abel is killed by his brother Cain. And the text says that Abel's blood cries out from the ground, implying that it's crying out for justice upon the sin of his murder. So here's the contrast. Abel's blood called out for justice upon sin. But Jesus' blood itself was God's justice for sin. Jesus' blood speaks presently, continually, ongoingly a better word than Abel's. Jesus is our innocence before God, turning our separation into nearness and our trembling into joy. Jesus is why we've left Mount Sinai and come to Mount Zion. Jesus himself mediates for us a new covenant purchased by his own blood. God's glory is this is what Jesus does. He brings an imperfect us near a perfect God because of Jesus' perfection. And you and I deserve none of this. We deserve the opposite of this. And so if you've known Jesus for a while, don't let this be old news. This is the glory of God in the gospel that brings you a life that you don't deserve and pays the penalty for a death that you do deserve. God himself chose to bring you near and did all the work to make it happen. Jesus did everything. Everything's changed. I want us to catch all of this because this is the epitome of the glory of God. Remember, Jesus is the brightest, surest, clearest way to gaze upon the glory of God. Let this sink in. Just listen as I recount all the things that we see in Jesus that is the glory of God. Because of Jesus, this is all in our passage, because of Jesus, we now have a new and better covenant mediated by Jesus himself. Because of Jesus, we now experience the transcendent God of Mount Sinai as the near God of Mount Zion. Because of Jesus, we now are made perfect before God by his shed blood. Because of Jesus, we now have communion with God rather than separation. Because of Jesus, we now have joy before God rather than being stuck in fear. Because of Jesus, think about this. We join angels in celebration in God's very presence. Because of Jesus, the ultimate firstborn, we too now get to inherit everything associated with being the firstborn. Because of Jesus, we get to actually be in personal relationship with a God who's both terrifyingly transcendent and also joyfully present. This is the God full of glory. And all of this is due solely to God's grace. It's a gift. We can't earn it. We can't lose it. It's the idea of a transcendent God of the universe. He started it. He's going to bring it to completion. It's not just that now we have the opportunity to earn these things, but they have already been accomplished for you by Jesus. It's done. If you're a Christian, if you trust Jesus to save you, all of these beautiful truths that we've walked through, everything about the superiority of Jesus and the privileges of being God's child applies to you now, today, in their entirety. And you did nothing to earn it. This is the glory of God in the gospel. What does that do to your soul? Does your heart want to explode a little bit? Maybe a lot bit? Like, do you have a fuller sense of the glory? We got to remind each other of these things. This is one of the reasons why we gather every week. Remind each other the depths of God's glory. It's this glory of God that then compels our worship. The glory of our big and transcendent God who is at the same time near. The glorious God we experience in communal joy, and all of it is because of Jesus. And so our natural response to this is worship. Let me pray that the Spirit would be at work in our hearts, compelling our worship, reminding us of who God is. Let's pray. God, we're weak. We get distracted. We get focused on other things, things that are urgent, things that are important to us, and over time, if left to ourselves, we begin to lose grasp on the depths of your glory. Your glory diminishes in our mind. And so, Spirit, I pray that you'd be reminding us not only of the truths that we know in our head, but refreshing us and impressing upon our hearts the glory of God and what you've done for us that we never could have accomplished on our own. The depths of who you are, the sheer magnitude of who you are, and at the same time, you're a God who's personal and close and intimate. A God who himself took action so that we could be in relationship to you and we could do nothing. You chose us. You sovereignly chose to place your saving grace, your saving love upon us. And so I pray that would never become old. Would what we do on Sunday mornings and throughout the week not just become empty habits and routines. And when it feels like we've got to force our worship, Spirit, I pray that you'd impress upon us again your glory. I need your help with that. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.